In the previous episode, we left Iran at a moment of formation. Not yet an empire, not yet even a unified culture, but something was beginning to take shape. Across the plateau, different traditions, Elamite, local, Indo-Iranian, had begun to overlap. Rituals involving fire, ideas about order and its disruption, a sense, still unformed, that the world might be structured by opposing forces. These ideas didn't yet belong to a single system, they existed in fragments. And then, at some point, nobody's entirely sure when or exactly where, those fragments were brought together and given a new clarity by a figure known to history as Zoroaster, or in the older Iranian form, Zarathustra. Even now, he remains elusive. The texts associated with him, the Gathas, which form the oldest part of the Avesta, are composed in an archaic language that is difficult to interpret. They're poetic, dense, often ambiguous. They don't read like narrative biography, they read like fragments of revelation. Because of that, reconstructing Zoroaster's life is difficult. Later traditions place him in different regions, sometimes in eastern Iran, sometimes further west. Classical Greek writers like Herodotus mention Persian religious practices, but don't give us a clear account of the man himself. Modern scholars debate his date, placing him anywhere between roughly 1500 and 1000 BCE, with some arguing for even later. So what we're left with is uncertainty. But what we aren't uncertain about is the nature of his message. Zoroaster doesn't simply add a new deity to an existing pantheon. He reorganizes the structure of belief itself. At the center of his teaching is Ahura Mazda, often translated as wise lord. Ahura Mazda is not one god among many competing gods. He is the source of truth, order, and all that is good. Opposed to this is not an equal god in the same sense, but a destructive force, the hostile spirit. What matters isn't the exact metaphysics, because that evolves over time, but the framework. The world is not morally neutral, it is divided. On one side is Asha, a word that carries meanings like truth, order, rightness, the proper arrangement of things. On the other is Druj, the lie, deception, distortion, the breaking of what should be. This isn't just a philosophical distinction, it's ethical and it's immediate. In Zoroaster's vision, every human being participates in this division, through speech, through action, through intention. To tell the truth is not just socially useful, it aligns you with the fundamental order of the universe. To tell a lie is not just a personal failing, it strengthens the forces that undermine the order of the universe. This is where some of the themes from our previous episode begin to crystallize. Earlier we saw hints of a concern with order, ritual precision, correct recitation, proper conduct. But Zoroaster takes that concern and sharpens it. Ritual is no longer enough on its own. What matters is conscious ethical choice. Now, this is a significant shift. In many earlier systems, maintaining order is primarily the responsibility of ritual specialists, priests, who know the correct formulas, who perform the right sacrifices at the right time. In Zoroastrian thought, responsibility expands outwards so that every person becomes accountable, not in an abstract sense, but in a daily practical way. The Avesta repeatedly emphasizes what later becomes a famous formulation: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. It's simple and it's comprehensive. Thoughts shape intention. Words shape reality. Actions shape the world. Nothing is neutral. This is where fire takes on its most enduring meaning. Fire was already important in early Iranian ritual, and that's still the case, but now it's interpreted through the lens of Asha. Fire is the clearest visible symbol of truth. It's pure, it transforms, it illuminates. Now, Zoroastrians don't worship fire itself, they tend it, they protect it from pollution. In fire temples, the flame is carefully maintained, sometimes for generations, as a reminder of the presence of order in a world that is always at risk of falling into disorder. And this concern with purity extends beyond fire. Zoroastrian practice develops detailed rules about cleanliness, about the handling of water, earth, and especially the human body after death. Corpses are considered sources of contamination associated with druge. This leads to distinctive funerary practices. Zoroastrians practiced sky burial, placing the dead on an elevated open-air platform called a Tower of Silence, so that vultures and the sun could remove the flesh. This was done to avoid polluting the sacred elements, earth, air, fire, and water. To an outside observer, this can seem austere or even severe, but within the system, it's consistent. If the world is a battleground between order and corruption, then maintaining purity isn't merely symbolic, it's a necessity. Now, over time, these ideas begin to shape not just individual behavior, but political authority, which is where Zoroastrianism becomes more than a religious system. It becomes the moral framework of Iranian civilization. When we first see Persian kings emerging in historical records, especially under the Achaemenids, they do not present themselves simply as conquerors. They present themselves as upholders of Asher. Take Darius I, for example. In the Behistun inscription carved high into a cliff, he describes his rise to power and repeatedly invokes Ahura Mazda. He frames his victories not just as political successes, but as the triumph of truth over the lie. His enemies aren't merely rebels, they are followers of the lie. This language isn't accidental, it reflects a worldview in which political legitimacy is tied to moral order. To rule well is to align the kingdom with Asher, and to rebel is to introduce druge into the system. That way of thinking shapes how kings justify their authority. It influences how justice is imagined. It affects how order is maintained across a vast and diverse population. It also helps explain something that might otherwise seem surprising: the relative tolerance of the Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus the Great, for instance, is remembered both in Persian sources and in others for allowing conquered peoples to maintain their own religious practices. The most famous example is his policy towards the Jews in Babylon, allowing exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. There are different ways to interpret this historically: pragmatism, imperial strategy, but within a Zoroastrian-influenced framework, it can also be understood as respect for established order. If different peoples have their own traditions that maintain stability and coherence, then preserving those traditions can be seen as aligning with Asher rather than disrupting it. Now, Zoroastrian ideas don't remain confined to Iran. Remember, the plateau is a place of movement, so the ideas travel, partly through contact, partly through empire. During the Achaemenid period, large Jewish communities live under Persian rule. And it's during and after this period that certain concepts become more clearly articulated in Jewish thought. Ideas about angels, about a final judgment, about a more defined opposition between good and evil. Scholars debate the extent of direct influence, and it's important not to oversimplify, but the parallels are there. Later, similar structures appear in Christianity and Islam: heaven and hell, resurrection, a moral accounting of human life, a cosmic struggle that gives meaning to history. Zoroastrian isn't the sole source of these ideas, but it is one of the earliest traditions to articulate them in a systematic way. So in that sense, its influence extends far beyond the Iranian plateau. And yet, even as these ideas spread, they remain rooted in the specific conditions we explored in the previous episode. A world shaped by stability and movement, a civilization that values order but has never been entirely static. Zoroastrianism reflects that balance by offering a structured vision of the universe, clear distinctions, defined responsibilities, and a moral architecture that gives coherence to life. But it also assumes ongoing struggle. Order isn't given once and for all, it has to be maintained, defended, reaffirmed through action. That tension between stability and effort mirrors the earlier tension between settlement and mobility. Iran doesn't resolve its contradictions, it just integrates them. By the time we reach the height of the Achaemenid Empire, these ideas are no longer abstract, they're embedded in everyday practice. Fire tempests stand as a physical expression of an invisible principle. Inscriptions evoke truth as the foundation of power. Ethical language shapes political language. But even then, the system isn't rigid, and Zoroastrianism itself evolves over time. Later texts expand on earlier ideas. Ritual practices become more elaborate. Interpretations shift depending on region and period. What remains, though, what remains consistent, is the core insight that the world is structured but not secure. That human beings are participants, not observers. And that truth is something that must be enacted, not merely believed. By the end of this phase, Iran has something it didn't have before, a framework, a way of understanding the relationship between the human and the cosmic, between action and consequence. And this framework will shape everything that comes next. Because soon these ideas will move from the realm of thought into the realm of empire. They'll be taken up by rulers who command vast territories, inscribed into stone, built into cities, carried along roads that connect continents. And in that process, something new will emerge. Not just Iran as a cultural field, but Persia as a political force. In the next episode, we turn to that transformation, to the rise of Cyrus and the creation of an empire that doesn't simply conquer land, but attempts to organize diversity on an unprecedented scale. And to the question that will define it. What does it mean to rule a world that is not uniform without destroying what makes it different? But for now, thanks very much for joining me. Have a great day.